The first crack of a jackhammer shattered the suburban silence at precisely 8:03 a.m. Thomas Mitchell stood in his backyard, arms crossed over his chest, watching with satisfaction as the demolition crew attacked the decrepit in-ground pool that had been the bane of his existence since purchasing the property 3 months ago. The morning sun glinted off the fractured concrete as chunks of the pool's edge began to crumble away. "We should have this eyesore cleared out by tomorrow afternoon," Mr. Mitchell, the foreman, said, raising his voice over the mechanical cacophony. "Though today's gonna be the loudest part of the job." Thomas nodded, taking a sip from his coffee mug. "That's fine. I've notified all the neighbors. All except one," he thought grimly, glancing at the pristine two-story colonial that shared his eastern property line. Eleanor Prescott had responded to any of his 3 attempts at communication, not the polite note in her mailbox, nor the email to the address listed in the neighborhood directory, nor his knock on her door last Sunday afternoon. He'd done his due diligence. The permits were displayed properly at the front of his property. The work was scheduled within the city's approved hours for residential construction. Thomas had even coordinated with the HOA, though their approval wasn't technically required for removing an existing structure. The pool itself was a disaster, a relic from the 1970s with hairline cracks in the foundation that sent water seeping into the surrounding soil. The previous owners had simply stopped maintaining it 5 years ago, allowing it to become a stagnant breeding ground for mosquitoes and a constant safety hazard. The inspector had strongly recommended removal rather than repair, and Thomas, with his 2 young children, hadn't needed much convincing. 20 minutes into the demolition, Thomas was in his home office on a Zoom call when he heard it, the unmistakable wail of police sirens approaching his street. He excused himself from the meeting and walked to his front door just in time to see 2 police cruisers pull up along the curb. Behind them stood Eleanor Prescott, a woman in her early 60s with meticulously coiffed silver hair and an expression of righteous indignation. "That's his house, officers," she said loudly, pointing a manicured finger at Thomas's front door. "He's destroying neighborhood property without any permits or permission." Thomas stepped outside, document folder in hand. "Good morning, officers. I'm Thomas Mitchell, homeowner. Is there a problem?" The taller of the 2 officers, whose nameplate read Ramirez, approached. "Sir, we've received a complaint about unauthorized construction and violation of noise ordinances." "I can assure you everything is properly permitted," Thomas replied calmly, opening his folder and extending the documents. "Here are all the necessary approvals from the city. The work is being conducted well within the allowed hours, and the company is fully licensed and insured." Officer Ramirez reviewed the papers while his partner spoke with Eleanor, whose voice grew increasingly strident. "This is unacceptable. That pool is part of the original neighborhood design. You can't just remove it without consulting everyone affected. The value of my property depends on the aesthetic continuity of the block." The second officer, a woman with Chen on her badge, maintained a professional demeanor despite Eleanor's escalating tone. "Ma'am, if he has the proper permits for work on his own property." "I don't care about permits," Eleanor interrupted. "I have a right to peace and quiet. I work from home, and this racket is making it impossible to concentrate. And what about my afternoon garden parties? The entire summer schedule will be ruined." Thomas felt a headache building behind his temples. He hadn't wanted conflict with his neighbors, especially not on a day when he had back-to-back client meetings. But as Eleanor continued her tirade, he realized this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment he closed on the property. What he couldn't have anticipated was just how badly Eleanor Prescott had miscalculated by involving the police, and how that miscalculation was about to backfire on her in ways neither of them could have imagined. Officer Ramirez handed the permits back to Thomas with a nod. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Mitchell. You've got all the necessary approvals and are operating within the permitted hours." Eleanor's face flushed crimson. "Well, obviously he showed you the paperwork asterisk after asterisk I called. He probably rushed to get it this morning when he heard I was filing a complaint." Thomas maintained his composure despite the baseless accusation. "The permits were issued 3 weeks ago, officer. The approval dates are clearly marked." "That's correct," Officer Chen confirmed, glancing at Eleanor. "Ma'am, the documentation predates today's work. There's no violation here." Eleanor wasn't deterred. "Fine, but what about the noise? There are ordinances against this level of disruption in a residential area. The city code allows for construction noise between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on weekdays," Officer Ramirez explained patiently. "Mr. Mitchell is well within those guidelines." Thomas could see his neighbor growing more agitated as her complaints were systematically dismantled. What he didn't expect was her next move. "Well, what about the historical significance?" Eleanor pivoted, her voice taking on an authoritative tone. "This neighborhood was built in 1972 by renowned developer Harold Westman. Every home was designed with complementary features, including the backyard pools. Removing one disrupts the architectural integrity of the entire community. Thomas blinked in surprise. This was the first he'd heard about any historical designation. Officer Chen seemed equally confused. "Ma'am, is this neighborhood registered as a historical district?" she asked. "Well, not officially," Eleanor admitted, "but I've been working on the application. I'm the president of the Westbrook Preservation Society, and we've been gathering signatures for the petition." Thomas stepped forward. "Officer, this is the first I'm hearing about any preservation society or historical designation efforts, and I've spoken with the HOA president, who made no mention of this." A dark sedan pulled up behind the police cruisers, and a man in a suit emerged carrying a leather portfolio. Thomas recognized him immediately as Brian Weber, the HOA president. "I received a call about a disturbance," Brian said, approaching the group. "What seems to be the problem?" "Perfect timing," Eleanor said triumphantly. "Brian can confirm that we've been working to preserve the neighborhood's original design elements." Brian looked confused. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Eleanor. There's no active preservation initiative that the HOA is sponsoring." Eleanor's confident expression faltered. "But the Westbrook Preservation Society. Is that your garden club?" Brian asked, genuinely perplexed. "The HOA has no record of any official preservation society operating in our neighborhood." Thomas watched as the realization spread across the officers' faces. He felt a mixture of vindication and discomfort as Eleanor's credibility crumbled in real time. "Miss Prescott," Officer Ramirez said, his tone now firmer, "filing a false police report is a serious matter." "False report?" Eleanor sputtered. "I most certainly did not. You claimed Mr. Mitchell was conducting work without permits, which is demonstrably untrue," Officer Chen interjected. "You also implied there were historical preservation restrictions that don't actually exist." Ryan cleared his throat. "If I may add, the HOA has actually been encouraging homeowners to address safety hazards on their properties. That pool was on our list of concerns from previous inspections." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You're taking his side? After all my years of service to this community?" "This isn't about taking sides," Brian replied calmly. "It's about following established procedures and respecting property rights." What happened next would become neighborhood legend. Eleanor, seemingly unable to accept defeat, marched across Thomas's front lawn toward his backyard, declaring loudly that she would document the destruction herself. "Ma'am, you can't enter private property without permission," Officer Ramirez called after her. Eleanor ignored the warning, striding purposefully around the side of the house. Thomas exchanged alarmed glances with the officers before they all followed. By the time they reached the backyard, Eleanor was standing at the edge of the demolition site, smartphone raised, recording the workers. One of the men had stopped his jackhammer and was asking her to step back for safety reasons. "Ma'am," Officer Chen called out, "you need to return to public property immediately." Eleanor whirled around, her face a mask of indignation. "The public has a right to know what's happening here. This community is being destroyed one jackhammer blow at a time." The following week passed in tense silence. The pool demolition had been completed without further incident, at least without any direct confrontations. Thomas had noticed Eleanor watching from her upstairs window, documenting the process with what appeared to be a high-end camera with a telephoto lens. He considered waving at her once or twice, but thought better of it. By Friday afternoon, the backyard bore no trace of the dilapidated pool. In its place lay fresh sod and a modest patio where Thomas planned to install a play set for his children, who would be moving in permanently once the school year ended. He stood admiring the transformation when his phone buzzed with a text from his next-door neighbor on the western side, Michael Abernathy. Asterisk heads up. You just got served with something. Process server left papers in your mailbox when you didn't answer the door. Eleanor was watching from her porch with what I swear was a glass of champagne asterisk. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He walked around to the front of the house and found the thick manila envelope protruding from his mailbox. Inside was a document bearing the heading COMPLANT for injustice relief and damages. Eleanor Prescott was suing him. The allegations were as creative as they were numerous. Diminution of property value, violation of implied neighborhood aesthetic covenants, reckless endangerment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and most bizarrely, destruction of community aquatic heritage. Thomas sat heavily on his front steps, scanning the document with growing disbelief. Eleanor was demanding that he restore the pool to its original 1972 condition and pay $75,000 in damages for the severe psychological trauma she had endured while witnessing its destruction. He immediately called his cousin Meredith, a real estate attorney who had helped him with the purchase of the house. "She's what?" Meredith exclaimed after Thomas explained the situation. "Thomas, this is frivolous at best, delusional at worst. What should I do?" he asked, watching as Eleanor emerged onto her front porch, ostentatiously watering plants while stealing glances in his direction. Forward me everything. The complaint, your permits, any photos you have of the pool before and after, and any communications with this woman. I'll file a response, but honestly, I'm tempted to countersue for harassment. Thomas followed her instructions, spending the evening compiling all the relevant documentation. He added a folder of photos clearly showing the pool's deteriorated condition and the standing water that had accumulated in it over the years. A mosquito breeding ground and fall hazard rolled into one. The next morning, while Thomas was enjoying his coffee on his new patio, a familiar sit-in pulled into his driveway. Ryan Weber from the HOA stepped out, his expression grim. "Morning, Brian," Thomas called out, walking to meet him. "What brings you by?" Eleanor Prescott, Brian sighed, accepting Thomas' offer of coffee. She called an emergency HOA meeting last night, tried to push through a retroactive bylaw amendment prohibiting the removal of legacy water features without unanimous approval from all neighbors within a 100-yard radius. Thomas nearly choked on his coffee. "You can't be serious." "Oh, it gets better," Brian continued, shaking his head. When that failed, she motioned to establish an architectural heritage defense fund using HOA reserves, ostensibly to protect community members from rogue renovations, but transparently aimed at financing her lawsuit against you. "I take it that didn't pass either." It did not. In fact, several board members expressed concern about her behavior. Mrs. Chen from down the street, no relation to the officer, pointed out that Eleanor's own koi pond installation 3 years ago didn't exactly honor the original landscape design. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "She has a koi pond." "Had," Brian corrected. "She filled it in last year after neighborhood kids kept throwing pennies in it. Apparently, it was making her fish sick." The irony wasn't lost on Thomas, so she removed the water feature without neighborhood approval. Exactly. The meeting got pretty heated after that came up. Brian hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Eleanor has been collecting information about you." Thomas tensed. "What kind of information?" "During her presentation, she mentioned you were divorced, that your ex-wife lives in Seattle, and that your children spend most of the year with her. She implied you're removing the pool specifically to spite the neighborhood children because of your own. How did she put it? Unresolved parental trauma." A cold anger settled in Thomas's chest. His divorce had been amicable if painful, and the custody arrangement was temporary while he established his home office business. The preliminary hearing for Eleanor's lawsuit was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early June. Thomas arrived at the county courthouse 20 minutes early, dressed in a conservative charcoal suit, accompanied by Meredith and carrying a leather portfolio bulging with documents. They were seated in the modestly appointed courtroom when Eleanor made her entrance. She was dressed as if attending a state dinner rather than a civil proceeding, a tailored navy suit with gold buttons, pearl earrings, and a matching necklace that caught the fluorescent light. Behind her trailed a young attorney who looked fresh out of law school, struggling with 3 oversized binders and a rolling briefcase. "That's Kenneth Dawson," Meredith whispered. "Passed the bar 8 months ago. Works for his uncle's firm that specializes in estate planning, not litigation." Thomas nodded slightly. She probably couldn't find anyone else to take the case. Judge Harriet Martinez entered the courtroom promptly at 9:00 a.m. In her early 60s, with steel gray hair and rectangular glasses, she had a reputation for efficiency and minimal tolerance for frivolous proceedings. "Prescott v. Mitchell," she announced, scanning the documents before her. "This is a complaint for injunctive relief regarding the removal of a swimming pool." Eleanor's attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Kenneth Dawson representing the plaintiff, Eleanor Prescott. We're seeking both injunctive relief and damages for the defendant's willful destruction of a neighborhood historical feature, causing significant property devaluation and emotional distress to my client." Judge Martinez peered over her glasses. "And you are seeking specific performance requiring the defendant to reinstall an in-ground swimming pool on his private property." "That's correct, Your Honor." Along with compensatory damages, the judge turned to Meredith and counsel for the defense. "Meredith Chen, Your Honor, representing the defendant, Thomas Mitchell. We filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice on the grounds that the plaintiff's claims are entirely without merit, and additionally, we filed a countersuit for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Judge Martinez nodded. "I've reviewed both filings. Mr. Dawson, I'll hear your arguments against dismissal first." What followed was 20 minutes of increasingly desperate legal reasoning. Kenneth Dawson attempted to argue that an implied aesthetic covenant existed in the neighborhood, that Eleanor had prescriptive rights to the view of Thomas's pool, and finally that the removal constituted intentional community impairment. The legal theory, the judge noted, did not appear to exist in any jurisdiction. "Mr. Dawson," Judge Martinez interrupted, "do you have any precedent whatsoever for these claims?" Well, Your Honor, this is a unique situation with novel legal questions. That's not what I asked. Do you have any case law supporting the notion that a homeowner cannot remove a deteriorating structure from their own property when they have obtained all proper permits and followed all applicable regulations? Not specifically, Your Honor, but Ms. Chen, the judge turned to Meredith. Your Honor, not only did my client follow all legal requirements for the pool removal, but we have documented evidence that the pool posed a significant safety hazard. In fact, during a police call instigated by the plaintiff herself, Ms. Prescott trespassed onto my client's property and nearly fell into the demolished pool area, demonstrating precisely why the removal was necessary. Meredith presented the court with the police report, along with photographs of the pool's deteriorated condition and the proper permits. She then introduced statements from 3 neighbors confirming that Thomas had notified the community about the planned removal. Additionally, Your Honor, Meredith continued, we have evidence that Ms. Prescott herself removed a water feature, a koi pond, from her property in 2023 without seeking any neighborhood approval. We also have security footage showing Ms. Prescott trespassing on Mr. Mitchell's property on multiple occasions after the initial incident. At this, Eleanor gasped audibly, whispering frantically to her attorney. Judge Martinez reviewed the security footage stills showing Eleanor peering through Thomas's windows and placing small objects in his garden. Ms. Prescott, the judge asked, what exactly were you depositing in Mr. Mitchell's garden beds? Eleanor straightened in her seat. Property boundary markers, Your Honor. I had concerns. 3 months later, Thomas sat on his new deck, watching his children play on the elaborate treehouse and swing set that now occupied the space where the decrepit pool had once been. 8-year-old Emma was teaching her 6-year-old brother Jack how to use the telescope they'd mounted on the upper platform, currently aimed at the family of cardinals that had nested in the maple tree at the corner of the yard. Dad, I can see the baby birds. Jack called out excitedly. They're so tiny. Thomas smiled, taking a sip of his lemonade and enjoying the late summer breeze. The past few months had brought more drama than he'd anticipated when purchasing the house, but the outcome had exceeded his most optimistic expectations. The sound of a car door closing drew his attention to the driveway where Meredith was emerging from her sit-in, a manila folder tucked under her arm. She waved and made her way around to the backyard. Settlement papers, she announced, holding up the folder as she climbed the deck steps. All signed and notarized. Eleanor Prescott has officially dropped all claims and appeals, agreed to your restraining order terms, and will be paying the full settlement amount. Thomas whistled softly. I honestly didn't think she'd go for it. She didn't have much choice after what we found at the county records office. Meredith grinned, accepting the glass of lemonade Thomas offered. The records had revealed a stunning truth. The original 1972 neighborhood plans had indeed included a specific design aesthetic, but it wasn't what Eleanor had claimed. The developer's initial blueprint showed that only 4 houses on the block were intended to have pools, and Thomas' property wasn't among them. Eleanor's house, ironically, had been designated as a nature lot with protected old-growth trees that had been removed when she'd extensively renovated in the 1990s. More damning still, they discovered that Eleanor's own pool had been added in 1983, 11 years after the neighborhood was built, and without conforming to any original aesthetic she claimed to be protecting. How's she taking it? Thomas asked, genuinely concerned despite everything. The neighborhood grapevine had been buzzing with rumors about Eleanor's increasingly erratic behavior since the court hearing. Meredith shrugged. About as well as you'd expect. The restraining order means she can't contact you or approach within 50 feet of your property. She's also barred from attending HOA meetings in person for the next year. She can submit concerns in writing or attend virtually. And the surveillance charges? She got lucky there. The DA decided not to pursue criminal charges in exchange for her agreement to undergo court-mandated counseling. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. That seems fair. I never wanted to see her face criminal penalties. I just wanted her to stop the harassment. The settlement had been substantial but reasonable. Eleanor would cover all of Thomas's legal fees, pay damages for the harassment and privacy violations, and make a significant donation to the Neighborhood Park Fund as community restitution. Most importantly, she had signed a legally binding agreement never to challenge any properly permitted home improvements in the neighborhood again. Uncle Thomas, Emma called from the treehouse. Someone's taking pictures of our house. Thomas turned, instantly alert. From their elevated vantage point, the children had a clear view over the fence to the street. He quickly climbed up to join them. A man in his early 30s stood on the sidewalk, a professional camera with a telephoto lens in his hands. When he noticed Thomas watching, he waved. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Alex Reyes from Modern Homes magazine. We're doing a feature on innovative backyard transformations. Your contractor submitted your project, and we'd love to include it in our summer issue. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Thomas blinked in surprise. He glanced at Meredith, who had followed him up to the treehouse platform. She shrugged, equally surprised. After a brief conversation with the journalist, Thomas learned that his pool removal and backyard redesign had been nominated for a regional landscaping award. The focus on safety, sustainability, and family-friendly design had caught the attention of both the magazine and the local urban planning department, which was considering featuring the project as a model for responsible renovation in established neighborhoods. As Alex photographed the yard and took notes about the transformation, Thomas couldn't help but notice a pair of curtains twitching in an upstairs window of Eleanor's house. "Do you think she set this up to keep tabs on you?" Meredith murmured. Thomas shook his head. "The timing doesn't work. The submission would have been made months ago when she was still fighting me tooth and nail."